Okay, welcome to the On Film with Kevin McCarthy podcast. I am honored today to be joined by one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, a filmmaker that I grew up watching and loving your work, director Park Chan-wook, talking all about the new movie No Other Choice. Good to see you, sir.
예, 불러주셔서 고마워요. 반가워요.
Thank you for having me, and it's great to meet you.
An honor to have you here. I also want to shout out your incredible interpreter, Ji-won, who's going to be off camera interpreting Director Park's answers today. So thank you to her as well. We're going to start off with this. I started this show as a longer form podcast to have longer form conversations about filmmaking. And I always wanted to dive into the different decisions a director has with their cinematographer and their composer and their editors. But I started this show off because when I was a kid, I remember going to the movies and feeling that communal experience, the importance of going to the movies. Growing up, what was a pivotal theatrical film that you saw that was important to you to know the importance of film? I know Vertigo is your favorite movie of all time, but do you have theatrical experiences you saw that were important?
예, 제가 어렸을 때 기억은 그 디즈니 애니메이션인데요. 그 정확한 제목을 모르겠어요. 엑스칼리버가 아닐까요? 아서 왕 이야기였어요. 물론 어린이용. 그것을 보았던 기억이 좀 생생하게 납니다. 멀린의 도움으로 이렇게 수련하는 과정을 특히 재밌게 보았던 기억이 납니다.
I think a movie I especially remember from back when I was younger is a Disney cartoon. It was an Excalibur movie, I believe, about King Arthur. And I especially remember enjoying the training sequence where Arthur's training with Merlin.
그리고 물론 본드 영화들 굉장히 좋아했고요. 좀 더 컸을 때 10대 초반에 봤던 그 타워링 인퍼노라는 그 디자스터 영화인데 그 영화가 정말 나를 크게 흥분시켰던 기억이 나요. 그래서 스티븐 맥퀸과 폴 뉴먼이라는 두 배우한테 완전히 빠져들었습니다. 정말 반했어요.
And of course, I also watched Bond movies growing up. And when I was older, I think during my early teens, I remember a disaster movie called Towering Inferno. And that really excited me. And I fell in love with Steve McQueen and Paul Newman.
Those are really good choices. And it's interesting. I bring that up because I remember specifically discovering you as a filmmaker. I remember the exact moment that it happened. And when I was growing up, I used to live near a Blockbuster Video. And I would go there and I would walk through the store and I would find movies I wanted to rent. And I remember coming across the Old Boy DVD. And on the cover of the Old Boy DVD was Quentin Tarantino's name. And I was like, okay, if Quentin's name is on this, I'm gonna rent it. And then I rented the film, and it was a game changer. It opened up my eyes to the world of your storytelling, and it was pivotal for me. And I was curious if you had moments like that growing up, where you found a filmmaker's voice for the first time, and then that filmmaker became a pivotal part of your cinema journey, like it kind of did with me, where I found you through walking through a store and seeing Quentin's name on your DVD case.
제 기억이 제일 지금 떠오르는 것은 제가 대학 입학 시험을 마치고 나서 처음 그러니까 그 한국에서는 그 대학 입학 시험이 굉장히 중요하고 경쟁이 심하거든요. 그래서 그 전에 1년 동안은 영화가 따위를 볼 수는 없어. 극장에 갈 수는 시간이 없었습니다. 그런데 그 시험이 끝나니까 이제 해방이 되어서 극장을 갈 수가 있었고 그때 처음 보았던 영화가 또 공교롭게도 또 다른 엑스칼리버였어요. 이거는 존 부어맨의 실사 영화죠. 그 영화를 보았을 때 충격은 정말 잊을 수가 없어요. 그래서 그 전에 보았던 그 오락 영화들과는 완전히 다른 굉장히 독창적인 감독의 비전이라는 것이 이런 것이구나 하고 그때 깨달았습니다.
One thing that just came up to my mind is after I finished my college entrance exam, and in Korea, the college entrance exams are very important and competitive. So while I was preparing for the exam, I didn't have time to go to the theaters. So after the exam, I finally had my moment of liberation, and I finally went to go see a movie. And interestingly enough, it was another Excalibur film, but this was a John Borman live action film. And I can never forget the feeling of shock that I felt as I was watching the film, because up until that point, I've only considered entertainment purposes films, and this was the first time that I truly got to see the creative vision of a filmmaker.
그래서 그 후로 존 보어맨의 팬이 되었고 당연히 포인트 블랭크라는 영화를 또 찾아서 보게 됐고 나의 최애 영화 중에 하나가 되었고 그것이 결국은 도널드 웨스트레이크라는 작가에게 나를 이끌었고 그가 쓴 또 다른 작품인 The X를 만나게 된 거죠.
And ever since then, I became a fan of John Borman, which led me to one of his movies, Point Blank, which became one of my favorite movies of all time, which then led me to Donald Westlake, which then led me to the novel The Axe, which the No Other Choice is based on.
물론 포인트 블랭크는 웨스트레이크라는 이름을 안 쓰고 다른 필명을 쓰긴 했지만요.
But for Point Blank, Donald Westlake used a different pen name instead of his real name.
So what was the pen name?
Something Stark, Philip Stark,
Okay.
Richard Stark.
I'll add it in on the video. I know Vertigo is your favorite movie, and obviously this conversation is going to be wide ranging about filmmaking, but obviously we're going to be focusing heavily on No Other Choice, which I've seen twice, and we're going to dive into that. But with Vertigo, when I was a kid, I saw that movie and I saw the dolly zoom, and I didn't really understand why it made me feel the way it did, but when I saw it again in Jaws, when Roy Scheider sees the shark for the first time, the technical nature of that shot, the zooming in and pulling the camera back, it's narratively driven. It's a cool shot, but it's narratively driven. I was curious, do you remember the first time you felt that Vertigo effect when you saw Vertigo and what that shot meant to you? Did you understand why it made you feel the way it did?
예, 저 역시 그 영화에서의 그 테크닉이 결정적이었습니다. 그래서 영화의 그 테크닉이라는 것 또는 예술에서의 형식이라는 것, 폼이라는 거 있잖아요. 그것이 그저 장식이나 그저 멋부리는 도구, 뭐 아름답게 꾸미는 그런 수법이 아니라 캐릭터의 감정이라든가 또는 theme을 운반하는 그것은 그냥 그 자체로 내용과 형식이라고 흔히 이렇게 분리해서 말하지만 분리될 수 없는 한 가지다. 스타일을 통해서 바로 내용이 전달된다. 그것은 분리될 수 없고 스타일이 곧 주제고 스타일이 곧 내용이다. 라는 깨달음을 저한테 안겨줬습니다. 그것이 바로 그 버티고에서의 그 기법이었죠.
I also was very much influenced by the technique that you mentioned in the film. It was very significant for me because that was the moment when I realized that technique or in movies and form in art isn't just for decorative purposes or to beautify the film. It's really for conveying the character's emotions and the theme. People usually like to speak on the story and the form in separate terms, but that was the moment when I learned that they are one and the same. Style equals theme and style also equals plot. And in Vertigo, during that moment, that's when I was hit with that realization.
Yeah, and that led me down a path. Like I remember going back to watch Hitchcock's Rope, and back then I think the film magazines were like 11 minutes, so he would have to like go behind like Jimmy Stewart's jacket, and he would cover the edit and just move along, and it felt like a big oneer because it felt like a play. And I think that's kind of what he was going for. And that's another reason where the technique is cool and it looks really interesting, but it's also servicing the narrative. Are you a fan of that movie Rope?
예, 물론 좋아합니다. 언젠가 저도 그렇게 폐쇄된 공간, 하나의 제한된 공간 안에서 모든 이야기가 끝나는 그런 일에 도전해 보고 싶고요. 그렇게 해서 영화 관객이 그 스토리 속에 완전히 빠져들어서 하나가 되어서 인물들과 하나가 되어서 그 세계 속에서 함께 사는 그런 경험을 제공하는 영화를 만들고 싶습니다. 이것도 역시 버티고의 경우와 마찬가지로 형식이 그리고 스타일이 그 자체로 그냥 그 영화의 팀을 표현하는 그런 좋은 예라고 할 수 있죠.
Yes, I'm also certainly a fan of The Rope. And just like in The Rope, I also want to try taking on the challenge of setting a story that starts and ends in one limited space. And I think that would allow the audience to be immersed in the story and the characters and truly live in the world. And for The Rope as well, just like in Vertigo, it's a great example of how form and style is used to express the theme in the movie.
You know, I was just sitting here listening to you speak, and I had a moment in my mind about the beauty of cinema and the universal language that cinema speaks. And like I mentioned that Old Boy story, like I found you at a video store, and we were countries apart, which is really wild to me. And cinema has that beautiful way of bringing us together. You found American films growing up. I found your films growing up. And it's interesting. And I'm wondering if you can just speak to the beauty of the universal language of cinema and how, while we're sitting here right now speaking two different languages, we're speaking the same language about movies.
예, 사실 영화의 힘이라고 말할 수도 있고 또는 모든 예술의 힘이라고 말할 수도 있죠. 문학 또 음악 이 모든 것들이 미술 이 모든 것들이 다 보편성을 갖지 않는다면 진정으로 성공한 작품이라고 말할 수 없고 그렇게 잘된 작품들은 어느 나라 어느 시대 우리가 그걸 접하더라도 똑같은 감동을 느낄 수 있다는 것이 얼마나 놀라운 일인지 얼마나 기적 같은 일인지 새삼 생각하게 됩니다.
Yes, it's the precise universality which really holds the power of cinema and of all art as well. It's the same case for literature and music and art. If they're not universal, then they're not successful pieces of art. And these successful works, regardless of what country you're from and what time you're viewing it as, they will always manage to touch you. And I think that's the miraculous power of universality of art.
지금 제가 여기 오는 차에서도 음악을 들었는데 타이달로 들었는데 프레디 허바드, 허비 행콕 이런 사람들이 1970년에 연주한 음반을 들었어요. 근데 1970년 내가 그러니까 10살도 되기 전에 녹음된 음반인데 나는 음악을 들을 때 눈을 감고 그 사람들 연주하는 모습을 상상을 하곤 하거든요. 근데 정말 그런 모습을 이렇게 생생하게 머릿속에 그려볼 수 있는 그런 것이 정말 얼마나 기적 같은 일인가 또 한 번 실감했습니다.
And on my way here, I was listening to music by
Freddie Hubbard and Herbie Hancock.
and those were performed in 1970s, which was even before I turned 10 years old. So when I'm listening to their music, I close my eyes and imagine them playing, and I can vividly imagine it in my head. And again, I'm reminded of the miraculous nature of art.
Well, and what you're saying also kind of speaks to this idea of the art form of movies and music and the legacy and the sense. Have you ever seen the movie Babylon, the Damien Chazelle film?
yeah.
There was a scene in that film where Brad Pitt's character, he's struggling with like the movies are going from the silent era to the talkies, right? And there's an article written about him that says like, about the death of his career essentially. And Jean Smart, who plays a reporter in the film, she's basically saying to him in the scene, in 100 years, someone's going to turn back on your work and you're going to flicker back to life. And essentially this idea of what you're saying with music, when you were closing your eyes, those artists were coming back to life. Do you feel that way about the work that you do in the sense of when we are gone, our work lives on and we come back to life through the art of film and music?
예, 바로 그게 제 목표죠. 영화를 만드는 데 있어서 지금 당장 사람들이 좋아할 그런 내용을 그런 요소를 끌어들이는 것에 대해서 항상 의심하고 다시 생각을 해보는 이유가 이것이 지금 당장 인기를 끌 수 있는 어떤 요소, 어떤 내용, 어떤 대사, 어떤 카메라 움직임 그런 것들이 당장은 지금 사람들의 인기를 끌고 호감을 얻을 수 있을지 몰라도 이렇게 만들어서 내가 죽은 후에도 사람들이 찾아보는 영화가 될 수 있을까? 항상 그 기준으로 검증을 하곤 합니다.
That is precisely my goal. When I make movies, I'm always thinking twice and being doubtful of elements that audiences today would specifically like. So, dialogue or story or camera movements that audiences today would like. If I include that, audiences might enjoy the movie more today, but would it help audiences in the future enjoy my film more? That is always the standard that I use when I'm making my creative decisions.
Incredible.
저도 시네마테크나 필름 아카이브에 극장 상영관에 가서 옛날 영화들을 많이 보는 사람으로서 주로 저는 사실 옛날 영화를 많이 보거든요. 그런 사람으로서 늘 생각합니다. 내 영화가 과연 50년, 100년 후에도 이 극장에서 상영될 수 있을까? 그것이 저의 유일한 판단의 기준입니다.
I visit cinematheques and film archives and I watch a lot of old movies there. In fact, I usually only watch old movies. And when I'm watching movies there, I think about my films and how 50 or 100 years later, would my films also be able to be screened at this theater? So that's the my standard for how I make all of my decisions.
I took my wife and her mom and dad to see a 70 millimeter presentation of Lawrence of Arabia. And when the film hit the screen and it was two 70 millimeter projectors and the projectionist was switching back and forth and it was the cleanest and most beautiful presentation, but I'm watching the film and it looked like it was shot today. But there was something beautiful about that story resonating in 2025 and it being shot decades and decades ago. But when that film projector comes on and that image hits the screen and you hear that music and that overture and that score, you're right. There's like this. There's nothing like that, really. I find. I'm curious. Like, do you have favorite like projection movies you've seen in theaters like in recent years? Like, have you seen 70 millimeter of Lawrence of Arabia? Have you seen like the older films like 2001 and 70 millimeter?
저도 역시 같은 영화인데요. 로렌스 오브 아라비아를 제가 영화 감독이 된 후에, 그러니까 20세기 말에 그 한국의 서울에 가장 크고 좋은 극장이 문을 닫으면서 문을 닫는 게 아니라 멀티플렉스로 개조되면서 그 몇천석짜리 거대한 극장에서의 마지막 상영으로 그 영화의 70mm 상영을 했습니다. 그래서 그 영화를 70mm를 볼 수 있는 마지막 기회라고 생각해서 영화 좋아하는 사람들이 다 몰려가서 봤죠. 그 추억을 지금 잊을 수가 없어요.
It's actually the same movie for me, Lawrence of Arabia. So around the late 20th century, after I had become a filmmaker, there's a very famous theater in Seoul, and that was going to be replaced by a multiplex theater very soon. And for their last screening at their large screen theater, they decided to screen Lawrence of Arabia on 70 millimeters. So it's the last chance to watch the movie in the original theater. So a lot of the movie lovers gathered there to watch it that day.
It's incredible. And speaking of movie theaters and tying this now back into No Other Choice, so I mentioned at the beginning about my discovering of Oldboy happened through Quentin Tarantino being on the cover of the movie. And now all these years later, as we sit here in LA, the Vista Theater that Quentin Tarantino owns is playing your film right now in 35 millimeter. That's got to be an interesting full circle because, like, can you talk about how that relationship with Quentin kind of led your films more into the American audience and how now your film is playing in his theater now in 2025 in America, and talk about maybe his impact on bringing your work to American audiences.
퀸틴이 소유한 극장이 그 뉴 베벌리 시네마 아니에요?
Yeah, he has the New Beverly and the Vista. But he has two. Your movie's at the Vista. Yeah.
와 부럽다. 예, 확실히 켄튼이 올보이가 칸느에서 상영됐을 때 심사위원장으로서 그 영화를 큰 상을 주었고 그리고 많은 사람들한테 여기저기 이야기하고 다녀 주어서 이 영화가 좀 더 많이 호기심을 사람들이 도대체 무슨 영화길래 하는 그런 궁금증을 갖게 만들어 줬죠. 그래서 정말 고맙게 생각하는 친구고요. 예, 그래서 퀸틴이 갖고 있는 극장에서 지금 노 어더 초이스를 하고 있다는 건 저는 몰랐어요. 지금 처음 알았는데 그것도 정말 아직도 또 신세를 지고 있네요.
Wow, I'm very envious of him. So back at the time, he was the head of the jury when Old Boy was shared, and he's the one who decided to give me the big award for it and spread the word with everybody, which allowed people to have more curiosity about the film. So he's always going to be a friend that I'm very much grateful for. And I had no idea that he owned the theater that No Other Choice is screening at right now. So again, I guess I'm also still indebted to Quentin.
On the theater, on the marquee, it has your name and it says in 35 millimeter, no other choice. It's really cool. I'll show it to you afterwards. It's really cool. Okay, so let's dive into the filmmaking. So no other choice. Like the filmmaking in this film is incredible. I want to go through editing, sound design, cinematography, and score. But first, I want to talk about tone. Your films always, in my opinion, juggle, I would argue, an impossible tone because you have this way of juggling serious, comedic, dramatic. Obviously, love is a huge theme throughout your stories, but the push-pull of tone to me is fascinating. And I know that you have to, in the writing process and in the filmmaking process and in the editing process, find that tone. Over the years, how has that balancing act changed? And how have you found your tone shifting over the years?
글쎄요, 저는 JSA 때도 그게 굉장히 비극적인 이야기 소재로 봐서는 비극적인 이야기인데도 거기서 그 남북한 병사들이 처음 만나서 친구가 되기까지의 과정들을 보면 굉장히 웃기는 장면들이 많이 있거든요. 그때부터 저는 이미 그렇게 유머 또는 코미디 요소들을 씀으로써 오히려 비극성을 더 강화하는 그런 길을 찾아서 계속 왔다고 생각합니다.
Even back when I was working on JSA, this is a story that deals with a very tragic subject matter. But throughout the process of how the North Korea and South Korean soldiers meet and become friends, there's also a lot of funny scenes in that journey.
Yeah.
So I think by using humor and these comedic elements, I in fact try to strengthen the tragic nature of the story.
And that leads me to a scene I want to dissect, which is Lee Byung-hun's sequence with the first attempted murder. I won't go into too many spoilers, but for people listening to this, if you're not familiar with the story, Lee Byung-hun's character essentially loses his job after 25 years working in paper and essentially takes matters into his own hands to make sure that he gets the next job. And that means trying to take out and kill the other prospective people who are going up for the job as well. But there's one particular scene where Lee Byung-hun's character goes in with the gun, and essentially the music is extremely loud in this scene as the characters are speaking over the music. That's an interesting scene for tone because as he's pulling the things off of his hand, there's a comedic beat to it, but it's also an extremely serious scene because of what the character is doing. That to me is a great example of the push-pull. Can you speak about finding that in a scene like that?
예, 모든 것이 하나다라는 것이 저의 철칙입니다. 그러니까 코미디와 비극은 한 덩어리여야 한다라는 것이 언제나 제가 가진 원칙입니다.
Everything is one is my principle. So comedy and tragic being one entity was the principle that I approached the scene with.
그 씬을 설명하자면 만수가 얼마나 초보 살인자인지 한 번도 이런 일을 생각도 상상도 해본 적이 없는 사람이다라는 것이 중요하잖아요. 그는 평범한 사람이고 그런데 그저 자기가 좋아하는 그 일을 다시 하고 싶을 뿐인데 그러려면 방법은 이것뿐이다라고 해서 이제 살인의 길로 나서는 건데 그는 너무나 서투른 사람이에요. 거기서 모든 것이 이 코미디가 시작되는 거죠. 그래서 그 나름대로 생각을 해서 어떻게 하면 살인을 잘할 것이냐 아무 경험도 없고 지식도 없는 살인자로서 거기서부터 출발을 하는 겁니다.
And to expound on the scene, it was important to show that Mansu is a novice killer who would have never imagined doing something like this. He's just a typical guy who simply wanted to do the work that he loves again. And the only way to make that possible was to kill these people. And because he's so inexperienced as a murderer, that's where the comedy starts, from his lack of experience. So from his very little knowledge and little background, he's trying to brainstorm, how can I best kill these people?
그래서 총소리가 밖에 크게 들리지 않도록 하기 위해서 소음기를 필요로 하는데 그에겐 그런 장비가 있을 리가 없으니까 집에서 쓰는 그런 오븐 장갑도 쓰고 또 아이들하고 놀 때 크리스마스 때 놀 때 썼던 산타클로스의 장갑도 쓰고 뭐 이것저것 온갖 걸 스키 장갑도 쓰고 그걸 겹겹이 감싸가지고 그걸로 소음기 역할을 하겠다라고 생각한 거죠. 그런데 가보니까 이 타겟이 된 사람은 음악을 듣는 사람이에요. 음악을 크게 듣는 사람이에요. 그러니까 잘 됐다고 싶은 거죠. 그래서 음악을 볼륨을 더 올리니까 이제 소음기가 필요 없게 됐어요. 그래서 이제 장갑을 하나씩 벗어도 되게 되는 거죠.
And in order to make sure that his gunshot isn't heard, he needed a silencer, but he didn't have such a fancy device, which is why he decided to use the oven mitts from the kitchen and Santa Claus gloves that he used when he was playing with his kids and ski gloves. So he's using all of these as a silencer instead. And then he realizes that his target is someone who likes to listen to his music really loud. So it became really convenient for him because he didn't need those silencer anymore. And that's when he decides to take them off one by one.
그런데 여기서 중요한 것은 제가 이제 이런 장치들을 만든 동기는 여기서 세 사람 타겟이 된 범모와 그의 아내인 아라 이 부부 그리고 만수라는 우리의 주인공 이 세 사람이 서로와 그러니까 서로에게 할 얘기가 많아요. 마음속에 담아둔 이야기가 많아요. 그래서 막 정말 크게 소리 질러서 절규하듯이 대사들을 속마음을 막 털어놓게 만들고 싶었어요. 그러기 위해서는 이런 큰 음악이라는 장치의 도움이 있으면 좋은 거죠. 그래서 이제 이런 장면이 구상이 된 거고 한국에서 개봉했을 때에도 한글 자막이 들어 있었어요. 그러니까 이 장면은 자막이라는 장치조차도 코미디의 도구로 사용하는 그런 독특한 장면이 됐습니다.
And what's important here, and my motivation behind the use of the device of this loud music, is that the three characters in the scene, Pammo and his wife Ara and Mansu, all have lots to say to each other. So I wanted them to scream out the dialogue to each other and really yell out what's in all of their hearts. And so it was helpful to have this loud music since it motivated them to do that. So that's how the scene came to be. And even when the film screened in Korea, there were Korean subtitles on the screen for the audience. So this is a case in which the subtitle was also used as a comedic tool in the scene.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. I was wondering that, like, when you filmed the scene, was the music actually there or was it added in post and the actors were just yelling?
그 씬 촬영할 때 음악을 실제로 틀고 하셨는지.
예, 이게 그렇게 하고 싶었지만 그러면 편집을 하기가 어려워집니다. 정말 프레임 단위까지 계산해서 촬영하지 않는 한 그건 불가능한 일이죠. 그래서 음악은 이 정도로 크게 결국 완성된 영화에서 이 정도로 크게 틀어질 거야라고 배우들한테 미리 말을 해준 다음에 음악은 전혀 없이 촬영을 해야 했습니다. 그래서 그 배우들도 정말 힘들었죠. 이게 어느 정도 큰 소리로 해야지 음악하고 밸런스가 맞는 것인지 그걸 이제 여러 가지 테스트를 해본 다음에 그대로 했는데 지켜보기에는 정말 좀 바보들처럼 보였죠. 아무 소리도 없는데 그렇게 크게 소리를 지르는 모습들이.
I wanted to play the music while we were shooting, but it would make editing too hard because we would have to calculate everything frame by frame. So instead, I just communicated to the actors in advance about how loud the music was going to be, and then we shot without the music playing. And I think it was very difficult for the actors because they didn't know how loud they had to be in order to balance their dialogue with the music. So we did multiple tests and made it happen. And watching them, they actually really looked like idiots because they were just yelling really loud when there was nothing playing.
I always think of that scene in David Fincher's Social Network when Jesse Eisenberg and Justin Timberlake are in the club and they're just yelling at each other with the loud music. I think they filmed it the same way.
예, 그렇겠죠 아무래도.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The sound design in the film is remarkable. I want to bring up the cicadas are really a big part of it. The daughter's cello, that is music that lives in the world of the movie, but also kind of plays as score. Would you agree?
그러니까 그 어떤 멜로디 없이 반복되는 그러니까 단순한 연습용 그런 소리를 말하는 거죠.
Are you talking about the repetitive sounds of the cello when she
Yes.
was just
There's points where we'll hear it without seeing the character playing, and it sounds like score. But then the camera will rise up, and we'll find the daughter playing, and we realize the music exists in the world of the film.
예, 정확히 그걸 주목해줘서 너무 고마워요. 그 장면은 이제 첫 씬에서 모차르트 협주곡을 틀어놓는 그 극 중에서 스피커로 틀어놓고 있는 설정에서 아주 감미롭고 정말 완벽한 음악이잖아요. 모차르트의 음악은 그런 완벽한 음악이 들리고 있는데 거기서 이상한 삑삑거리는 첼로 연습하는 소리가 그 침투하듯이 들리기 시작하죠. 그래서 음악을 망가뜨린 거예요. 모차르트 음악을. 그래서 이것은 정말 뭔가 실험적인 새로운 사운드트랙인가 하는 생각을 관객이 하게 되겠죠. 근데 이제 카메라가 서서히 그 리뷰를 시키는 거죠. 그래서 그 아이가 첼로 연습하고 있는 꼬맹이가 첼로 연습을 서툴게 연습하고 있다라는 그 정체가 드러나게 되는 겁니다. 그래서 저는 이것이 음악 사용에 좀 재밌는 사례라고 생각했습니다.
Yes, I'm very grateful that you pointed this out. So we start with the Mozart's concerto playing. And of course, this Mozart's piece is pleasant. And in fact, Mozart's music is perfect. But then you hear these squeaky sounds begin to invade this music. We basically ruined Mozart's music. And at this point, the audience might think, oh, is this some form of experimental soundtrack? And that's when the camera reveals that, oh, it's actually just a small kid practicing her cello. And I think this was a very fun usage of music.
그리고 또 하나는 그 아이가 그렇게 이제 첼로의 초보자인 것처럼 좀 귀에 거슬리는 소리를 반복해서 그것만 반복해서 그냥 단순한 연습을 하고 있잖아요. 그것이 영화에 처음에 등장하기 때문에 관객은 이 아이의 첼로 연주 능력에 대해서 좀 깔보게 되죠. 그렇지만 이제 영화가 흘러가면서 차츰 이거 스포일 하고 싶지는 않지만 하여간 차츰 영화가 전개돼 가면서 관객이 그 아이에 대해서 가졌던 그런 선입견이 이제 무너지는 경험을 하게 됩니다.
And another thing is because of this scene, this character really seems like a novice cellist because she's practicing the same bit over and over again. So at this point, the audience is underestimating the daughter's abilities in cello. And of course, I don't want to spoil the movie, but as the film progresses, we realize that the audience's prejudices begin to break.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and and that's a great piece of sound. But also the shoe store, the dinging of the door, and then the cicadas. Those are all like repetitive things. Can you speak about repetition and how that builds tension?
좀 관객을 불편하게 하죠. 어느 정도까지는 정말 허용 한도를 란 것이 있다면 거의 근접할 정도로 소리를 통해서 관객을 불편하게 만드는 것이 목적이었습니다. 그래서 귀에 거슬리고 좀 빨리 끝나면 좋겠다는 생각이 드는 그런 사운드를 통해서 긴장을 끌어올리고 그리고 만수가 처해 있는 이 상황 속에서 그의 감정, 그의 심정을 점점 괴롭게 만들고 싶었습니다.
I wanted to make the audience uncomfortable through the sound. So if there's a limitation to what's allowed, I really wanted to try to get to the borderline of that. So I wanted to make the audience uncomfortable through the sound that was playing, and I wanted it to feel disturbing, so much so that the audience just wanted to end. And that's what allows the tension to raise in the moment. And through this, we also see how disturbed the emotional state of Mansu is in the situation.
지금 제가 확장판 작업을 하고 있어요. 블루레이를 위해서. 그래서 편집을 한국에서 마치고 왔는데 18분 정도 늘어날 것 같습니다. 근데 거기서 그 구두가게 장면에서 대사가 훨씬 길어지면서 그 도어의 그 센서벨 소리가 훨씬 더 여러 번 반복됩니다. 더 훨씬 길게. 그래서 정말 그거는 한계까지 가는 것 같아요. 관객들이 보면서 야 정말 좀 그만 좀 해. 제발 문 닫아 여기서. 제발 빨리 닫아줘라고 비명을 지르고 싶을 만큼 오래 갑니다.
I worked on the expanded cut of the movie for Blu-ray release, and I had just finished editing the cut in Korea. So I think there's going to be an extra 18 minutes for the expanded cut. And for that cut, we extended the dialogue for the shoe scene as well. So because the scene is longer, we also hear the sound of the bell repeat for even longer. And I think because of that, we really reached the limit of what the audience can listen to. And I think because of this change, the audience might just find themselves screaming like, please stop, please just close the damn door.
It's an interesting tool because if the sound is happening off camera, we're filling in what's out of the frame and we're thinking of that. And I think that's interesting. Okay, so I want to talk about score. Score is another use of tone. You've always used score as a leading character in your films. It also helps the tonal shift of how we feel as the audience. What's your relationship with film score and talk about your narrative conversations with your composer and kind of how, because you have the writing, you have the story, you have the tone, but the music also affects the way we feel about every scene. If you watch The Shining and put like happy music on it, it changes the movie. So I'm just curious about what your tonal conversations are with your composer.
네. 조영욱이라는 사람은 좀 세계 영화 이렇게 영화 음악의 역사에서도 좀 가장 특이한 케이스라고 저는 생각을 합니다.
I think Cho Young-wook is actually a very unique case across all history of film music.
왜냐하면 그는 작곡을 하지 않거든요. 그는 그를 우리가 음악 감독이라고 부르는 이유, 작곡가라고 부르지 않고 그렇게 부르는 이유가 바로 거기에 있습니다.
Because he doesn't compose the music himself, and which is why we call him a music director instead of a composer.
그는 한 3명, 영화 한 편당 3명, 4명 정도의 젊은 작곡가들, 음악 대학을 갓 졸업한 그런 젊은 작곡가들을 선발해서 그들과 팀을 이루고 그들을 감독하죠. 글자 그대로 감독을 합니다.
So for every film, he selects 3 to 4 young composers and create a team. So these are young composers who are fresh graduates of music school, and just like his title music director, he directs them.
그래서 감독은 저는 그 작곡가들을 만날 일이 거의 없어요. 나는 이번 작품에서도 그들을 영화 음악 녹음한 스튜디오에서 처음 봤어요.
So I rarely ever get to see the composers. For this film as well, I saw them for the first time when they were recording.
그래서 조영욱이 하는 일은 감독과 함께 음악의 컨셉을 정하고 그리고 이제 그것을 가지고 아주 구체적인 계획을 세워서 이 젊은 작곡가들에게 이렇게 하자, 이런 곡을 써보자라고 이렇게 시키죠. 그러면 그들이 만들어 오면 계속해서 수정을 합니다. 수정을 시킵니다. 여기에 악기를 이렇게 바꾸자, 여기에 리듬을 이렇게 바꾸자, 이런 멜로디를 좀 넣어보자, 여기는 반복을 빼자, 뭐 이런 식의 그렇게 해서 만들고 또 그 결과를 놓고 또 저와 또 다시 한번 대화를 하죠. 저도 역시 똑같은 이야기를 합니다. 여기서 악기 편성을 좀 바꿔볼까? 뭐 이런저런 이야기들. 그렇게 해서 조영욱 음악 감독은 작곡가들과 나 사이에 그 중간자 역할을 하는 겁니다.
So Choi Young-wook decides on the concept of the music with the director, and then he makes a detailed plan on the music, and that's when he meets the composers and tells them what kind of music to write. And afterward, he continues to make revisions with the composers, like, oh, why don't we use a different instrument here, or change up the rhythm here, change up the melody, or have less repetition in this part. So after all those revisions, he then has another conversation with me, and I also have similar notes about, oh, why don't we just change up the instruments here? And after, so he basically acts as the bridge between me and the composers.
그리고 조영욱하고 나는 몇십 년째, 그러니까 영화 음악가와 감독으로 만나기 전에 그냥 친구였거든요. 그래서 그렇기 때문에 너무 친하고, 그리고 실제로 내 글자 그대로 내 옆집에 살아요. 그래서 언제든지 그냥 다른 뭐 자주 만나서 영화도 같이 보고 뭐 음악도 같이 듣고 콘서트도 같이 가고 그러면서 그냥 제일 친한 친구로 지내고 있기 때문에 영화 음악 작업을 할 때는 정말 스스럼 없이 모든 얘기를 다 솔직하게 할 수 있고 여러 가지 시도를 다양하게 이렇게 바꿔볼까 저렇게 바꿔볼까. 저도 음악에 대해서 얘기하기를 좋아하는 사람이기 때문에 그렇게 해서 음악 작업 자체가 너무나 즐거운 그런 과정이죠.
And Choi Young-wook and I, we had known each other even before we were music directors and film directors. So we had always been friends, and we've been very close for many years. And on top of that, he's my literal neighbor. He lives right next to me, which is why we hang out very often. We listen to music and watch movies together and go to concerts together. So he's truly one of my closest friends. And that's why our relationship allows me to have very honest conversations with him about the film's music. And it also allows me to try many experiments with the music as well, which is very fun for me because I am also a lover of music as well.
예, 그래서 어떤 장면은 이 화면과 잘 어울리게 음악을 했을 때 재밌을 경우가 있고 또 전혀 안 어울리게 그렇게 갔을 때도 재밌는 경우가 있고 그런 것들을 이것저것 많이 시도를 하면서 최적의 곡을 찾으려고 노력을 합니다. 그리고 이제 우리가 제일 중요하게 생각하는 것은 어떤 음악이냐 보다도 어디서 음악이 시작하고 어디서 끝날 것이냐, 어디 음악을 뺐을 때 좋은 장면들도 있거든요. 음악이 없을 때. 그래서 우리가 제일 약간 시간을 많이 들이는 것은 시작하는 타이밍 그리고 끝나는 타이밍 그리고 음악이 어디에 있을 것이냐 없을 것이냐 결정하는 것. 거기에 제일 많은 시간을 쓰는 것 같습니다.
And for certain scenes, there's instances where it's better off to have music that goes well with the scene that we're seeing with our eyes. And in others, it's better if the score feels completely off from what we're seeing with our eyes. So we go through all of these many experiments to try to find the best score. And what we truly prioritize is rather than what music we're using, we're always talking about when does it start and when does it end. Because for some scenes, it's better to not have music playing. So we spend the most time discussing when to start and stop the music and whether we need music here.
그리고 저는 정말 디지털 기술이 너무나 축복처럼 느껴지는 것은 음악 분야인 것 같아요. 저는 정말 우리는 그 디지털 기술 덕분에 몇 프레임 단위로 음악을 조정해서 그림, 이 화면에 정확히 매치되는 순간에 예를 들면 뭐 발걸음에 맞춰서 뭐 피치카토가 하나씩 동동동 들어간다든가 하는 식으로 이 그림과의 매칭에 아주 정확하게 매칭하는 일에 아주 몰두하죠. 그래서 관객들이 그런 것을 이건 이렇게 했구나라고 이렇게 말하진 않더라도 무의식적으로 이 음악과 이 그림이 이미지가 어떻게 아주 잘 맞물려서 정확하게 맞물려서 함께 가는구나라고 무의식 중에 느낄 수 있도록 합니다.
And an area where I feel like digital technology has brought the greatest blessing is truly music. Because thanks to digital technology, we're able to adjust the music to the scene frame by frame. And we're always trying to accurately match the picture to the music. So for instance, we have the pizzicato try to match the footsteps that we're seeing with our eyes. So we're very much invested in accurately matching the picture and the music to the best extent. And although audiences might not explicitly point that out, I think subconsciously they're able to sense it when it's really working together.
It's a great example of how audiences collaborate with you as the experience. I know we're running out of time, so I can't not ask you this question. So cinematography is I mentioned score. Score is a leading character in your films. So is your camera. Your camera moves like a character at times, the way it's moving, the way it's finding things. If we're on the iPad with the guns, the camera's moving back and forth. But I can't not mention the Old Boy hallway shot, obviously. It's a scene that, in my mind, is one of the greatest shots in cinema history. And it's a scene where the camera is very important as we're following the character in a oneer in this hallway fight. I know you've talked about it at length. I know everyone asks you about it, but I wouldn't be able to do a film podcast if I didn't see that scene as a kid, and it just sparked my love of cinematography. So could you just walk through your memory of filming that sequence, how many takes it was, and kind of the desire of what you wanted to get across, keeping it in a oneer as we go back and forth?
원래는 시작은 제가 그 액션 시퀀스를 찍기를 정말 귀찮아한다는 것입니다. JSA에서도 클라이맥스에서 총격전 장면이 있었는데 그것도 정말 찍기 싫었어요. 저는 액션 영화를 이렇게 보기를 좋아하지도 않고 찍는 것은 더 싫어했어요, 예전에. 그래서 근데 올드보이에서도 그런 장면이 하나 이제 드라마 전개상 필요는 한데 이걸 찍기 싫어서 어떡하지 하고 귀찮아하다가 마음을 크게 고쳐먹고 그래도 감독이 그래서는 안 되지. 그래서 그러면 정말 잘 찍어보자. 어차피 찍어야 하는 거라면 정말 독창적인 새로운 액션 시퀀스를 찍어보자라고 딱 결심을 굳게 하고 스토리보드를 만들었어요. 굉장히 자세하게 그리고 아주 샷 분할이 굉장히 많은 편집이 아주 빠르게 되는 그런 독특한 시퀀스를 이제 디자인을 했는데 촬영 현장에 가서 이제 좀 마음이 바뀌었죠. 먼저.
Well, it started out with how shooting action felt like so much work for me. So even back when we were working on JSA, there was a scene where there were gunshots, and I didn't want to shoot that either. I don't like to watch action, and because of that, I didn't want to shoot action either. But for Old Boy, for the sake of the plot, we needed a scene like that. And again, it felt like so much work to me. But then as a director, I realized I can't continue to think like that. I have to approach this scene, and if I have to include this, I want to make it as creative as possible. So I created a very detailed storyboards with many shots and fast edits to really bring out a very unique sequence. But then everything changed on set.
왜냐하면은 이제 첫날 리허설을 전체를 한번 해보기로 했어요. 그래서 배우와 스턴트맨들이 전체를 그래서 제가 뭐라고 했냐면은 이것은 리허설이니까 그리고 잘게 쪼개서 찍을 건데 그래도 전체 흐름을 보자. 그래서 처음부터 끝까지 그냥 쉬지 않고 하자. 다만 너무 힘드니까 천천히 하자. 힘들이지 말고 그냥 그 블로킹만 볼 수 있도록 그렇게 해서 한번 했어요. 근데 그렇게 천천히 힘도 안 쓰고 거의 슬로우 모션처럼 그렇게 했는데도 전체를 하고 나니까 배우가 너무 지쳐하더라고요. 너무 그냥 헐떡헐떡하면서 주저앉아가지고 땀을 비오듯이 흘리고 그 모습을 보는 순간 저 모습이야말로 내가 필요한 모습이 아닐까 하는 생각이 들었습니다.
So on the first day, we were doing a rehearsal of the whole sequence. And even though we were going to technically shoot this with different shots, since this is a rehearsal, I asked the crew and the cast that I want to see the whole thing as a rehearsal. And since this is just a rehearsal, I told the actor, you can do it very slowly. You don't have to put in too much effort in it, since I just need to see blocking for the rehearsal. But even while we were shooting the rehearsal, even though it was very slow motion, at the end of the sequence, the actor was extremely tired. As soon as we were done, he was panting, he had to plop down on the floor, and he was sweating. And then looking at him be that way, that's when I realized that is exactly the kind of thing that I have to capture for the scene.
그 캐릭터가 그 상황에서 느끼는 어떤 외로움, 그리고 이런 싸움은 도대체 왜 필요할까? 이게 무슨 자기의 원수들과 싸우는 것도 아니고 그냥 여기서 나가기 위해서 필요한 싸움인데 정말 하기 싫은 싸움이고 어떤 분노나 충동에 의한 싸움이 아니라는 거죠. 그리고 그것을 당연히 그렇게 마치고 났을 때의 정말 완전히 끝도 없는 그런 피로감, 이런 것이야말로 이 씬에 필요한 정서가 아니겠는가 하는 생각이, 그 깨달음이 찾아왔습니다. 그래서 내가 원래 계획했던 그런 현란하고 아주 멋진 그런 액션이 무슨 의미가 있겠는가 하는 후회가 생겼고요. 그래서 그날 갑자기 모든 계획을 다 그 스토리보드, 그 수십 개의 셋업으로 이루어진 스토리보드를 다 버리고 롱샷, 롱테이크로 가는 결정을 했죠.
Because the it really captured the loneliness that the character feels in the situation. Because at this point, he's questioning the purpose of this fight. Because he's not fighting his enemies; he's just fighting in order to get out of this building. So this fight isn't led by rage or great emotions, which is why he feels a sense of endless fatigue at the end of this fight. And I realized that was the exact kind of emotion that has to be portrayed and conveyed in the scene. And I realized that all the fancy and cool action setups that I had in my initial storyboard was meaningless. So I threw out the storyboard with the many setups, and we just completely changed the scene, and we decided to shoot this as a long take instead.
I want to mention editing. I think you have some of the best editing I've ever seen in films. There's dissolves in this movie that are brilliant. My favorite one is when he's digging the grave and the shovel, and then his wife turns over in bed. Yeah. Can you talk about the power of a dissolve and the power of editing, and kind of how different the editing becomes when you're making the film versus, like, when you wrote it and shot it? Do you find a dissolve like that in your post process, or do you write things like that into it? And reflections are a big part of this movie. Characters seeing themselves in screens or in the shower head or in the water. Like those, are all those planned? All those choices?
예. 그 디졸브는 사실 현대 영화에서 조금 좀 사람들이 잘 쓰지는 않죠. 영화의 페이스를 좀 느리게 만든다는 생각들을 하니까, 특히 긴 디졸브는 더 그렇죠. 그런데 제 생각은 영화의 감독이 구사할 수 있는 테크닉들이 여러 가지가 있잖아요. 그런 것들을 뭐든지 거리낄 필요는 없다고 생각합니다. 연장 박스에 많은 것들을 갖고 있으면 도움이 되죠. 그래서 필요할 때 뭐든지 갖다 쓸 수 있어야 한다고 생각하고, 최근에 내가 이 영화를 만들기 직전에 샹하이 익스프레스라는 영화를 봤는데 거기서 긴 디졸브가 나와요. 그런 걸 보면서 와, 정말 너무나 아름답고 젊은이들이 보아도 그런 이렇게 느린 페이스로 영화를 만들다니 너무 구식이다라고 절대 느끼지 않을 거라고 확신했습니다. 예.
Dissolves aren't used as much in modern films anymore because I think people tend to think that it slows down the pace of the film, especially if it's a longer dissolve. But there are many techniques that a director can use, and I don't think you should avoid using any of them because the many toolboxes in the many tools in the toolbox of a director, all of them are helpful, and you need to be able to utilize all of them. So before making this film, I watched the movie Shanghai Express, and there's a long dissolve in the film that's very beautiful. And watching that dissolve, I was hit with the realization that dissolves like this won't feel slow or feel old-fashioned even to younger audiences today.
중요한 것은 그것이 단지 멋부리기 위한 그런 도구로 사용될 것이 아니라 영화의 그때그때 그 인물들의 감정과 theme에 부합되는 것이냐 그것을 형식적으로 표현하는 것이냐는 데 있죠. 반드시 그래야 하고 두 번째로는 영화의 리듬을 부여하는 것입니다. 어떤 때에는 빠른 편집으로 어떤 때에는 긴 디졸브로 이렇게 변화를 주면서 영화의 리듬을 부여하고 긴장을 만들 수 있는 거죠.
And it's important that these dissolves aren't used to just beautify the film. It always needs to serve the emotions of the characters and formally express the theme of the film. So that's always the question that I ask before making these editing choices. And the second role of these edits are to provide a sense of rhythm to the film. So sometimes there has to be these fast edits, and other times we use the long dissolve to slow down the rhythm, which is the two purposes of these dissolves.
그래서 말씀하신 그런 삽으로 흙을 떠낼 때 아내의 머리가 이렇게 움직이는 그런 것은 그냥 후반 작업에서 할 수는 없죠. 그것은 철저하게 계획되고 거기에 맞춰서 촬영을 해야만 만들 수 있는 종류의 것입니다.
So, for instance, the scene you mentioned where he's digging the ground and we see the wife's head shift, things like this don't happen in post because it needs to be planned in advance and shot accordingly.
95% 이상의 편집이 그러니까 디졸브뿐만 아니라 거의 대부분의 편집이 스토리보드 단계에 이미 있는 것이죠.
So more than 95% of the edits, not just dissolves, but the entire edit, they already exist in the storyboard in advance.
Oh wow! Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been a true honor, and congratulations on the film. And everyone, check out No Other Choice in theaters. And if you're living in LA, it's playing at the Vista in 35mm. Thank you so much, Director Park.
예, 아주 즐거운 그리고 내가 하고 싶은 얘기를 실컷 할 수 있는 정말 좋은 대화였습니다.
This is a great, enjoyable conversation where I could talk about everything that I wanted to. So thank you.